Hi everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for episode 262 of Album of the Day, in which today I'm reviewing yet another 2020 album from a musical project that plays the kind of music that sort of blends together elements of indie and house and disco, plunderphonics, and hip-hop. I'm referring to the sound known as indie-tronica, and the artist I'm talking about is Caribou, which is the musical project of the singer-songwriter and producer known as Dan Snaith, who's also done a couple other projects, for example, Daphne, and he's sort of a little bit of a stalwart when it comes to indie-tronica, like sort of right up there with people like Portishead or the Avalanches and the Postal Service. And I'm here to review his latest full-length album, released on February 28th, 2020. And the album is called Suddenly, and it's the follow-up to 2014's kind of concept album, Our Love. I never heard of Caribou until this year. This album was released, but besides listening to this album, I sort of went back and listened to a little bit from his last couple of albums, 2010 Swim and 2014's debut, I think, for Merge Records, Our Love. And I would say, upon hearing some of his older stuff, I thought it was pretty decent. There were some pretty good intentions behind the music, and there was some pretty quality production, but it didn't really blow me away necessarily. Like, there were still some things he kind of needed to improve on. But hearing this new album of his, I will say that some of those improvements are definitely shown really well here. In fact, this is likely my favorite electronic album of the year so far. It's it's got a little something for everyone on it. It's definitely it's got a kind of shy, moody introspection that would definitely appeal to people who enjoy like the Postal Service or something like that. Plenty of incredible samples to make fans of like the Beastie Boys and De La Soul and the Avalanches just drool and drool, as well as plenty of creativity to sort of set it kind of above some of his peers and how they sound. The track Sister sort of goes for the former, and it's the opening track on the album. Really gorgeous, kind of moody synths and a very kind of shy, sort of boyish singing on the track, where he's sort of reflecting on kind of losing a relative or something like that, and then the song transitions into like these rewound kind of piano samples, and as well as this what sounds like a sample of one of his family members singing a lullaby. And then it closes with this really beautiful outro with this really cool synth that uses some kind of filters on it. So sometimes you'll hear it on the left ear, and other points you'll hear it on the right ear. Very creative way to end the track, even though it is so short. The next track, You and I, definitely goes for a much more energetic sort of vibe. The verses feature these really nice, sort of calming layers of synths over some really easygoing drums and kind of youthful vocals. But then the song in the bridge or chorus, whatever you call it, goes into these very tight trap rhythms, as well as kind of African percussion and percussion and guitars, and the song also has like a really triumphant and somewhat cinematic ending where there's amazing psychedelic guitars and layers of saxophone, and this very kind of emotional vocal performance from Dan Snaith. Dan isn't necessarily the most monumental singer in the world, but his performances, I think, really are very heartfelt and really pack a lot of emotion, just the way they are. Just the way they are. The track Sunny's Time opens with yet another really cool idea. This kind of rewound piano, then it goes in these kind of quiet, somewhat whispered, kind of murmured vocals that have a significant amount of effects on them. But then we go into these very kind of mosh pit inducing like refrains. It sounds like kind of an auto-tuned sample over some very energetic trap beats. Gots to bounce, gots to bounce, gots to bounce, gots to bounce. Before it goes in these very euphoric layers of sax and keyboards, which sounds very nice before it goes into a really lovely outro where we're seeing the piano continue to get rewound in some pretty interesting ways. So it sounds very introspective, but then it sounds very alien and kind of Kid A inspired. The track New Jade features an almost kind of R&B vibe with the very catchy vocal samples, "Darling in the past, darling in the past," which I think are very fun and go very well over the plinky pianos, the very tight beats, the layers of acoustic guitars, a really gorgeous combination. Just combination, and really is, in my opinion, probably one of the happier sounding songs on the album. Even if its lyrics are still quite melancholy, I feel like so goddamn happy when I listen to it for some reason, just because the instrumental sounds so good, and also at the point where Dan goes into his higher range vocally, I think is really awesome too. The outro is great. I love the kind of psychedelic filters being put on the guitars, as well as another really catchy female vocal sample towards the end. The track Home goes for definitely a bit of a... I'd say this track kind of reminds me of maybe a track called Quest Song a little bit instrumentally, but it also has similar kind of flute and string samples and kind of warped vocal samples and kind of twangy guitars to like an Avalanche's song, which is a very, very strong compliment, by the way. I could totally, as I agree with Anthony Fantano that I could totally see some rapper on top of this instrumental rapping about the good old days and stuff like that. But what Dan does vocally instead isn't too bad either. I think it really adds to the song very well. After this, however, we do get a little bit of a sort of a snag in the mix with the track Lime. I liked the song at first, but then after a while I sort of realized kind of how kind of flawed and sort of unfocused the song is. It basically jumps from one idea to another, and while some of the ideas I think are really cool, they just don't really feel all that cohesive. It goes from like this kind of mystical island pop sort of jam, and then we get these kind of funky slapped guitars and these kind of auto-tuned vocal samples. And then this really kind of dry, sort of bland vocal performance, and then this whole instrumental kind of ends abruptly and goes into this kind of like jungle chant almost, and while it is probably my favorite idea on the whole song, it just like it didn't need to be on this one song where there's like 6 other ideas that are not very cohesive at all. Thankfully, after this point, we do get by far the best track on the album, in my opinion, Never Come Back, which features that features these very cartoonish and kind of chipmunk vocal samples. Back, 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 get 'em, back, 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 back. And its mix of like really, and its mix of very blood pump, and its mix of and its mix of kind of dancey beats and dancey beats and energetic pianos and kind of very and sort of clacking percussion. It makes for one very nice combination. It sort of sounds like something maybe I would hear as background music for like a dancercise class or something like that. Mix that with a little bit of kind of new school sort of DJ kind of nerdiness, and you have one hell of a jam over some very over some kind of introspective performances. The next track, Filtered Grand Piano, is another point on the record that sort of feels like a filler moment. Doesn't really need to be there. I mean, I really like the idea, and I have to admit the track is very calming, but, you know, it could have easily been turned into a full song. Just me. The track Like I Loved You features these very twangy and kind of almost Caribbean-inspired guitar playing that I think is very beautiful. Really one of my favorite ideas on the record. And another track where Dan's higher range makes for one pretty satisfying and beautiful chorus on the track. And I love the way that the song builds up. You get these really gorgeous guitar solos, and then we get these layers of African percussion and and kind of wheezing synths. It's a really nice combination. Bless me. Then the song Magpie is a much sadder cut on the record, and likely probably the most depressing song on the entire record. Love the very colorful layers of synths. It starts out with these filters that are kind of playing through everything, making it sound as though it's being recorded in liquid or something like that. Initially, that was kind of the reason the song didn't really kind of wow me on first listen, but after a while it has grown on me and become really a true highlight on the record. And Dan's very emotional singing on the track, Julia, she's got so down. I really feel something when I hear it. And then the song's midsection with all those synth solos is like, it's so comforting. I'll tell you. The track Ravi sort of goes back to a much more energetic vibe shown by cuts like You and I and Never Come Back. This song also makes very impeccable use of vocal samples. And I love that point in the song where Dan starts singing on top of it and sort of makes you think as though all you're hearing is samples, but you're hearing this voice on top of it kind of singing that melody and doing it so well over the very tight beats. I definitely catch some really serious sort of nightclub vibes out of this track, and I think they're shown really beautifully. Anthony Fantano has even said this sounds like a UK garage jam, which I haven't really heard too many of that music, but I'm going to have to do a little more research on that. The closing track, Cloud Song, is the longest song on the record, over 7 minutes long. And yes, in the intro, it is a little bit tedious. I do really like the kind of watery synths, and the vocals sound great. It's just like, they kind of go on for such a long time that it makes the intro seem a little bit kind of bland at points. Uh, but then once we get in the second half and we get all these layers of synth kind of building up and more samples, and then it goes into this very awesome climax that I really like. We're getting more percussion, some very cinematic synth playing, and I believe a reverbed guitar solo at the end too. So at least, so even if not the whole song is amazing, at least the outro leaves some sort of really nice, sort of comforting taste in my ears at the end. Yeah, I really dig this album. It's not the most ambitious or the most forward-thinking electronic album, but it definitely does show a really good example of why indie-tronica is such an interesting style of music and how it's basically a melting pot of variety of different genres, and you can't really put any specific kind of label on it. Label on it. So hardcore fans of Caribou, I think, will most certainly be happy with this album and how he's progressed. But this is definitely an album that people that maybe were kind of lukewarm on his music are seen to be praising this album. It totally lives up to the hype, and that's about all I can say about it. Strong 8 out of 10. That's my review of the new Caribou album, Suddenly, and I'll see you for episode 263.